Good afternoon. Horizon House invites all kinds of outsiders for this special talk by Lynn. This is sponsored by the Speaking of Arts Committee of the Art Committee. And since so many are from outside, all our programs at Horizon House are run by the residents. So I'm on the Speaking of Art Committee, and we all take turns getting speakers, and I was lucky enough to get Lynn. I met Lynn, yay. I met Lynn when she lived in Seattle. I took her milestone class because I admired her work so much. I got such a kick out of it. And I have to say, talk about one piece, in case she doesn't mention it. It was my favorite piece, and it kind of refers to one of the pieces she brought today, which was a plastic pig that was clear, and she stuffed it with all kinds of found objects, as in candy wrappers, plastic grapes. There were just all kinds of awful things, and it was called You Are What You Eat. And I mean, this is decades ago, and this has always been at the top of my mind. You are what you eat. I think Lynn will probably tell you a lot about her history and her Seattle to Tacoma journey. So let's give her a welcome.
So welcome. I'm Lynn, Nino. I was born in 1945. I turned 79 years old about 4 days ago. So happy birthday. So when I was about 26 years old, there was a group in town called Friends of the Rag, and I bet some of you remember that group, a wearable art group, and I joined it, and one of the first things we did was collaborate with the Seattle Art Museum for an Andy Warhol show, and our theme was Martians. So I made this costume, and we also had a pre-party where all of the Friends of the Rag artists made weird appetizer things that we would end up showing at the opening party for Andy Warhol. Here's another set of costumes I made, some zebras that were in many shows over the years. And then, of course, I had to figure out how do you earn a living when you're making weird things. So I made actual wearable things that looked something like this. That, by the way, is Ed Neff, who used to own Bombay Bicycle Shop in Pioneer Square. So we thought of ourselves as collaborators. We used everybody in sight, musicians we knew to play at our gigs, and models that were really just friends that looked really good in our clothes. So then that was sort of the era of soft sculpture, the 60s and the early 70s. And I thought I should capitalize on that by making animals stuffed onto the wearables. This one is called You'll Never Walk Alone. And by the way, there were heavy wires in those flamingo heads, and when you walked, they bounced up and down right next to your face, so you really did feel supported. These pigeons I made for a show at the Renwick, and they're machine made out of fabric. And it was an anniversary show. I looked at a lot of images of the Renwick that had pigeons all over them. So I made these pigeons for a show. There were about 12 people in that show. I went back to the opening where I met Lloyd Herman. Some of you may have known him. And he took me around and introduced me to everybody. I felt like a big star. Here's the modern version of the pigeons. These I've been making lately. These are the spy pigeons. And I brought one up here that you can look at after the show. And these are the pigeons that are following us around all the time, taking notes in case you haven't noticed. So in those early years when I was doing a lot of soft sculpture, This is an example of one. It's a biker bird resting on a bed of nails. And that piece was about 2.5 feet tall, and I made a lot of work during that era, and it helped me support myself as an artist, which, by the way, I've done my entire career, supported myself on my art. Here's a Roger Schreiber photograph, one of the first pieces I made, basically out of spit and paper clips. So I didn't know how to weld yet, and I hate to think what happened to that bird. You know, maybe just a few years later, his neck was probably laying down by his legs. One of the things I figured out early in my career was that it really helped me advance a reputation if I included a picture of myself on the postcards with the artwork. And so I started that tradition. Whose photograph is this? Ken Wagner. Ken Wagner's here today, so is Roger Schreiber. So in those days, Panaka Art Gallery was in Bellevue, and I made a lot of soft sculpture that I sold there, and some of it is pictured on the pink Volkswagen I had at the time. Here's another Ken Wagner photograph. And although this is really a horrible reprint of a slide, I had to show you this is what I built most of my reputation on at the time, so-called dead dog tables. And they were animals, not always dogs, laying on their back, holding up a piece of glass. And I probably made 200 of those, all of them one of a kind. That was, by the way, when I learned that I needed to weld. This one is called Another Roadside Attraction. This one won an honorable mention at the Tacoma Art Museum for a group show, and it's called Rigor Mortis. Road Hog. Another example of the fabric tables I was making in those days. This image is a little bit distorted. It's hard to tell that that's a pig. And I believe this pig represents a sandwich. He's got lettuce and tomato on his forehead and a piece of cheese laying on the glass there. A fabric lion with a hockey glove for a face. So I was always hanging out in thrift stores finding the props for my sculpture. I've always been inspired by found objects, things that I see that I can reshape into an art or a theme for a piece that I'm working on. I've also always been inspired by news stories and words. So sometimes somebody can just say a phrase to me, it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to get home and make a piece that can use that title. So then I started getting into these tall, skinny things. This one is called bird brain. Stiff upper lip. A piece of glass that not pictured here, but rests on the fork tines and the forehead and the tail. So when you put a show together like this, you have to go through hundreds of images from 35 or 40 years worth of making things. And you come across a picture like this and you go, oh my God, this is my favorite piece. And then about 10 images later, you go, oh, no, this is my favorite piece. And this is one of my favorite pieces. I used to collect bottle caps off the street and then hammer them flat and sew them on all kinds of animals, including this, perhaps it's an armadillo. Here's another postcard by Ken Wagner. No, this one's by Tom Holt. And with all these cards I made over the years, they were like collaborations, excuse me. I would have a piece in mind, and then I would take it to Ken or Tom or Roger and say, you know, here's the piece. How can we get me into the picture not too conspicuously? So this piece is called Rolling with the Punches, and this kangaroo was about 8 feet long, really big, and it has a welded skeleton, and it did roll on its tail. And then, of course, I'm just pasted in there. That's not really me in that pouch. This one is called Bringing Home the Bacon. And still, I always had to figure out how to keep the money rolling in to support my larger habit. And I made probably a few hundred of these fabric crows. And mostly I used to sell them at Northwest Craft Center. Do any of you remember Northwest Craft Center? Almost everybody. So this is one of those images where you go, oh no, I can't believe I did a body of work like that. But I really should show it just, you know, to be honest about what I've been doing all this time. So first of all, I was hired by Act Theater to make 4 seated figures that would be placed in audience seats, and then they would do some promotion with those, which they did do. I didn't bring pictures of those, and they were life-size. So then I started thinking it'd be a heck of a lot easier to do these 3/4 scale pieces. So you can see I made a waitress, a bag lady, a biker, and Linda Ferris. Does anybody here remember Linda Ferris? Quite a few people. The man? Let's see. I can't think of his name, even though I knew him quite well. Bob, he was a medical doctor, a friend of mine. And I put him in the picture for scale. And by the way, the Linda Ferris figure ended up at an auction. I don't remember which one. And Linda Ferris happened to be one of the moderators of that auction. And so was another man I know who was an art collector. And when they started bidding on this piece, Linda hated this thing. She did not want that out in the world. So because she was bidding on it, my friend kept raising the bid. And I'm pretty sure he ended up with it, and I don't know whatever happened to it. It might be out there somewhere. And here's another postcard. And then I started moving more into using found objects. So as you can see, that's a suitcase and a bicycle seat and gloves and furniture legs and wheels. And then it's painted with elastomeric, which is a rubber-like product that usually you paint onto a roof to keep the water out. Gosh, I wish I could think of the name of this. This is praying mantis. It's a wall-hung piece, and you can see it's made also out of found objects.
You could call it I love you, and say eat their mates.
Good, good. So here I am experimenting with all kinds of mediums, which is one of the really fun things for me to think up an idea and then figure out how I can portray that idea with the right materials. And this happened to be some Boeing surplus wrapping paper I found. When you cut it, it curled into itself. And it was silver on one side and then just sort of a matte silver on the other side. Recognize that? Margaret's happy. So one night I was laying in bed and I opened up a book, and this is after years of making various sculptures and trying to think of really clever, punny titles. And I'm laying in bed and I opened the first page of the book and it said, Table of Contents. I was like, oh no, I can't believe I never thought of that before. And that set me off on making all these vinyl covered tables. So I welded a skeleton, and then I put an interior layer of fabric in it so that I would have a way to back all the products up onto it, and then I would sew the vinyl over that. This is a little bit like upholstery work. So I wanted to tell you, I think this guy's just full of fruit and vegetables. But I did another similar one filled with junk food. So I went to the store, and I had to find junk food that did not have any of those little see-through windows. Like Fritos doesn't have a window. You can just see it's junk food by looking at the outside. So I found all these different things, some Hostess products and candy bars and Diet Coke. There might even be a Diet Coke in this one. And I took them into my studio, and I was ready to start placing the junk food. And at about 9:30, I went, God, isn't there anything to eat around here? So I started eating the Fritos and then the cupcakes and this and that and the other. And by about 3 in the morning, I was higher than a kite. I had to go to bed. So along those same lines, this one isn't a table, but it's still an annal of contents. These are cigarette wrappers and cigarette butts stuffed into this. And this was in the days that people were still smoking a lot of cigarettes. And I always thought, the people that are smoking cigarettes are also the litter bugs, because you could find this stuff on the street everywhere. So I collected it, made this goat. I didn't have the theme or the title in mind particularly, but some friends came over, and I put the goat in the middle of the room, and I say, let's think of a title for it. And somebody said, what about Capricorn with Cancer Rising? I thought, boy, I can't do any better than that. Here's a piece called Publicity Hound, and in those days, it was pretty easy to get publicity. I think it's a lot harder now. We have fewer art critics, and you just can't get anything in print about your shows, but in those days, you really could, and I had a lot of publicity. So you can see I cut it up, and I had to duplicate a lot of it to cover a whole dog. So Terry Pagos took this photograph. It's a very enlarged photograph on my studio wall, and I don't really have a better print of it. But we went to Pratt, and I put on that evening gown, do not weld in nylon or polyester, whatever you do, or go barefoot for that matter. And then here's another shot like that, and we used that on some note cards I produced. And you can see kind of the result of the welding. This, you could say it's one stick of steel that goes all the way up through all the animals. And then, just like upholstery work, I cover each animal and work my way up. This was a postcard by Tom Holt. I think this piece is called Peep Show. This is an emu. And when you lift up its wing, this is like that guy in New York City that opens up his trench coat, and he's selling maybe watches. This emu is selling emu pornography. This is one of the craziest things I ever did. First, I welded a skeleton out of pencil steel, so it's almost like a line drawing shaped just like that. And then I cut 1/4 inch sheetrock to put over the entire thing. This is about 8 feet tall. And I did this because I was motivated by that movie, Picnic at Hanging Sheet Rock. And there's the picnic. There are ants crawling all the way up to that picnic. Tom Holt took this picture, and this was way before 9/11, but even in those days, you didn't take a weird-looking suitcase like that and stand in line or the cops would be on you like that. So we ran in there. I posed for this, and Tom had all this equipment, and I grabbed some of it, and we ran out. And this was a postcard, by the way. Here's another postcard, also by Tom Holt, who, like Ken and Roger, really helped promote my career by making these beautiful cards. This is a postcard, and I discovered that if you hold a small plastic cup over an electric burner, it flutes exactly like sea forms, Chihuly-esque sea forms in miniature. So we made this postcard based on sort of me being an underwater discoverer of these plastic pieces, and I made little platforms for them and had them in a show. This is the only show I ever sold out. Another Tom Holt postcard. Bev Sparks postcard. This is a Tom Holt photo also. And I am attempting to heal this purple warthog. It's a wall-hung, sort of a trophy head piece, and I did a series of those for this particular show. And this was at the time of the popularizing of that idea, El Nino, which I think we're in another cycle of it now. Then, because I hadn't worked in every medium, I thought I better try folded aluminum. So I would buy sheets of aluminum and fold them into these animal shapes. And sometimes I made light fixtures. I think this one is called Egg Drop. This is another one of my favorite pieces, probably because I worry so much about the rhinoceros population. And what you're looking at is copper. And I used to know how many holes I drilled by hand in that copper sheath thing so that I could stitch it together. And thinking about the dire situation of rhinoceros, I call it coming apart at the seams. And this was probably the first time I taught myself how to make molds so that I could cast these concrete legs so that whole heavy body would be weighted down. All of the professional artists at some time or other approached by these companies to be in catalogs and things like that. This is a page from the Guild where they, for a price, they advertise your work and they put the publications in architectural firms, engineering firms, things like that. Here's kind of a recent concrete table I made, slave to the trade. And this is for a couple that are mid-scale developers that turn warehouses into artists' live-work spaces. And both of them work so hard all the time and know every trade, carpentry, electric, plumbing, tile work, everything. These are pieces in a gallery in Tacoma many years ago. And another one of my favorite pieces, this standing here on the table and up on the screen is Tammy Faye Baker. And I used to have a lot of disdain for her, like so many, because of the work she and her husband Jim Baker did raising money for the church. And I thought, I better go see that Tammy Faye Baker documentary, which I did, and it really changed my mind about her. It did a good job of making her into a real person that had challenges just like all of us. So I made her very shapely. If you look closely afterwards, you can see she's got two cast hands that are holding a Bible. And you know those praying hands you see in thrift stores? I just took them apart, made molds of them, made that. So now I think she's okay, except she still wears a lot of makeup. Maybe too much. So here's her little face with, 5-pound eyelashes. These are the twins. These cats are both cast in the same mold, and I think of one of them as kind of modern with a computer mouse, and then the other one is old-fashioned, cast ordinary concrete with a mouse hanging out of his mouth. This is another favorite of mine. I probably made this 30 years ago, way before it was popular to be against gas. And this one is called Ship of Fools. There's a yellow brick road going down that skunk's back. And all of the tiny little cast vehicles are falling into the drink. This is one of those rare pieces. Every artist will agree with what I'm getting ready to say. You make things and you think, oh, it turned out great, but you don't love it. That's reserved for very few pieces where you think, I really was successful on this piece. And the balance of this piece, I thought I really got somewhere with it. Those are actual real bricks that she's resting on. Another balancing act. Concrete, a piece of steel goes up through everything. They don't come apart. And that way you don't break it when you move it. Here's some koala bears up on stilts. And this is the same deal. You weld from the bottom and you go up to the top and you come back and you make a big circle for the shape of the koala, go up and down the other stilt. In other words, sort of take miles of stilt, but everything is hooked together. Here's a wallflower. This is a shelf that rests its feet on the floor, but the back is up against the wall. It's hanging on the wall. Then I started making these chickens, and this was another way to support my habit. And I probably made 3,000 of these chalkboard chickens. And I had a hired crew that worked in my studio with me, but I painted every one of them. And when I closed the business down, the galleries that I'd been working with were like, oh no, we've been doing a great bread and butter business. So one of the galleries found a buyer who I taught how to make the molds and reproduce the chickens. And it's still going. Sometimes I'll be in Denver and I'll go by some gallery and there are my chickens. And I go, look, those are my chickens. Here's Tyson Greer, a friend of mine. This picture is about 30 years old. And maybe she was helping me sand them. I went to Cuba in 2004 on an artist exchange, and the idea was to make an animal that was one of their endangered animals, which was some kind of a rodent called almaqui. And somebody that traveled to Cuba took this picture for me. By the time we finished working on it, it was still too wet to move to the site. And here I am working with a friend, Diane Novak, on this almaqui. And by the way, you take your own supplies to Cuba because they had so little in 2004, and maybe it's still true, and certainly no steel. So we were working with a professor and his college students, and we would go out late at night into the neighborhood scavenging for pieces of steel that might be hanging around. So that's what his skeleton is made of. Here's a big door I made. A lot of my projects have involved groups of artists. I just can't resist, it's probably leftover from the Friends of the Rag days where we collaborated as groups. So I was in a conversation with Jen Graves, who was the art critic at the Tacoma News Tribune at the time, and we were just joking around. I said, too bad that Glass Museum cone is facing the wrong way, because that has meant terrible feng shui for Tacoma. And then I thought, oh, let's do a red door project, and I invited 11 other artists to make big outdoor able to live outdoors for a summer to make a door, and there were all different kinds of doors, steel and glass, everything you can imagine. And I felt like I had to make one too, even though I hadn't worked in that scale before. So this is milestone veneered over a structure that I made. And the fruit at the top is expanded steel lath with concrete over it. That's me on the bottom, and it says the title, "Not Tonight, Honey, I Have a Headache." This was commissioned at Children's Hospital, and it was to commemorate an anniversary. So this is the birthday party. And if you look closely, you can see 3 Jackson's chameleons, and they're about 9 feet long. Do you see all 3 of them? So here's what one of them looks like up close. And then I thought you might be interested to see how these things are made. So I welded a skeleton, and over that I put expanded steel lath, which is easy to shape and easy to sew together with wire. And then you start putting your concrete over the surface like this. And then when you get the whole thing covered with a good strong layer, then you mix another batch of milestone, which is just hybridized concrete that you mix with latex. They say milk because it looks like milk. And it's very adhesive and very strong, and it holds its color. So then after this layer, you put that veneer on. And here's another view of them. So because I know quite a bit about concrete, I've been hired over the years to do some repair jobs. And the statue in the lower right-hand corner was vandalized in Tacoma at Wright Park. So they got it over to my studio, and I was just clowning around by putting my head on top of hers. And somebody took this picture. And then I don't know, maybe about 3 years ago, the lions at Wright Park, one of them was vandalized. His nose was knocked off, and they hired me to replace his nose. The fun part about this story is that I was out there every day for a couple of weeks working on this, just putting a little layer on a little at a time, and somebody called the cops on me. Is she vandalizing that? So, I showed him my bucket of concrete and said, I'm here to help. Another Tom Holt postcard. I am born in Roswell, New Mexico, so it took us a long time to think that would be a pretty good theme for a show. Yet another Tom Holt photo. So this tall, skinny, black and white dog is peeing all over my shoes. This is taken at Alki. Oh, I have to tell you about this card. There's we'll call it an old-fashioned idea. Maybe you remember when you were a kid, your parents would hand you a salt shaker and say, go out into the yard and shake this on the tail of a bird and catch the bird and then come inside and show us. Does anybody remember that? Well, I thought that was a universal idea. So there I am shaking salt on that emu's tail and, printed hundreds of these cards and sent them out, and people would go, what does this mean? Oh, well, it still makes a good image. Yet another postcard. In recent years, I've been very interested in the idea of round people, just the shapes of the bodies, and I have wanted to duplicate that. And then at the same time, I heard a story on the radio about the man that developed Doritos. And he, in the story, it said that he was the first to hire scientists to get the exact right combination of sugar, salt, and chemicals so they became addictive, truly addictive. And the name of this piece, inspired by that story, is Pin a Dorito on an American. And corn is another villain in our world, so there she is standing on an ear of corn. Then I traveled to Uganda for a work trip and saw how many people there really didn't have enough food at all, and I couldn't help myself. I had to make this piece showing the contrast. Another story I heard that really inspired me was that Hostess was filing for bankruptcy. And I thought, you know what, I'm suspicious of that. I think they're doing this so they won't have to pay pensions to their workers of 30 and 40 years. And so I was inspired to do this show for that reason, and also because I thought if I use the real products in my work, they're already archival. So those are Hostess cupcakes in this vignette. And Howdy Doody was one of their original icons that they used to advertise their products. And you can see here he's brown-nosing the cupcakes. When I did that show, initially it opened in Tacoma, I invited friends to come, and I bought quite a few loaves of Wonder Bread, which is owned by the same company as Hostess. And I said, let's make little animals out of bread. Does anybody remember doing that when they were a kid? Some of you do. I know we did it at my house, that, or you wadded it up and then you threw it against the wall when your mother wasn't looking. This piece is called the Ark. So those are Hostess products going 2 by 2 by 2 into the future. All of these were as though they were found in ancient places. This one is an MRE, which I think stands for Meals Ready to Eat. Yes, that's right. And so this is from World War I, and you think it's going to be something nutritious, and when you open it up, it's a Hostess cupcake. This one is from the Shackleton disaster, where, you know, of course there was no food inside, but they did find a few sugar cubes and yet another Hostess product. Of course, Hostess wasn't even invented until the 30s. Another idea I had to do with artists being great martyrs in general. You know, they're always suffering for your good. So that's a millstone hanging around my neck, and I did a show of concrete necklaces. I thought I'm working in a perfect medium to express this idea. So any professional artist has been approached hundreds of times, can you donate something to the auction? And you agree to do it, you know, for the greater good, you should do it. And then when it comes time to pick the piece, you have to pick something pretty good. On the other hand, you had to give them something that you could actually get money for yourself. So this one is called I Can't Believe I Said Yes. This trio of necklaces, this is the domestic necklace here, the iron, the person endlessly cooking in the kitchen, that's an albatross necklace. And then that ashtray, I made a mold, and then I made the ashtray. And then I put a little hole in the ashtray so the smoker wearing this necklace could put a cigarette out right against their own chest. Then I started thinking it'd be really fun to use all the icons that go with food, like Mr. Peanut and like the Colonel and Tony the Tiger. There's so many of these animal icons, and I thought I'm going to make them all overweight, because if they're eating their own products like we are, they would be overweight. So here's the Colonel, and I don't know if you can tell he's got a chicken leg in his hand, and it's called Date with the Colonel, Dinner Date with the Colonel. And this piece I've got up on the table here, this is like all of us mainlining donuts. Donuts Are Us is the title. This is a self-portrait. This piece is only about 8 inches tall, and this is when I started getting interested, for some reason, in making tiny little figures, tiny little faces out of oven-baked clay. And this is a self-portrait of the artist pulling herself up by the bootstraps. And then, of course, every one of us has made a COVID something. So this one is called Uphill Battle. And it's wall hung, by the way, so it's low relief. And the fun part for me is figuring out, how do I represent that COVID symbol? And, you know, I looked around through my studio, through tons of boxes of artifacts, and then I finally thought, oh, golf tees are perfect for this. So you saw the little tip off of every one, push it into paper mache carved low-relief globe, and it looks just like COVID. I won the Artist of the Year Governor's Award in 2017, and it was in large part because of all the community organizing I've done in Tacoma, and it was a really fun dinner. Some of the people that probably voted for that are here in the room tonight. This piece, I forget the name of it, but I've also got a preoccupation with the single-use plastic we use, and I've made quite a few pieces, and this making these small-scale pieces lets me carve these little figures, which I really enjoy doing. Plasticized, and that's a stack of paper, or plastic plates he's standing on. There's a close-up of him. This one is a little hard to read. There's a woman up there. This is a globe of plastic, and there's a little woman up there in a lifeboat. And this one is called The Rising Tide. Here is a figure, I think of him as Sumner Redstone. And this is a pretty dark piece for me. There he is on an ice floe that's black. And you know, just wrecked by the environment. So I'm thinking of people that have quite a bit of money that aren't doing much to help our world. Here's another Under a Cloud, another plastic piece. And then more recently, I'm back to making things on the sewing machine, sweater coats. Like this one, things I think of people can wear every day. But that hasn't limited me. I still make these crazy things. This one happens to be out of paper. And then I did not do this drawing. I lifted it off the internet, but I put this here to give you an idea of what I think I'll be doing next. I want to make some animal trophy heads of extinct or nearly extinct animals. And I want them to seem to have been made by AI. And this particular photograph, a polar bear, everybody feels bad about their future. This is probably my very favorite piece. And it's up here, I brought it. This one is called St. Francis Feeding the Birds. He's feeding the birds cigarettes. And that's why they say that's the real reason birds are going extinct. If you notice the birds smoking cigarettes, just keep an eye out.
Well, anyway, but I can testify to the impact she had on the Seattle creative community and your co-conspirators that you've mentioned. Thank you. because in the mid-'70s, Friends of the Rag was such a force. And the SAM event was remarkable, and we had the weekly started, Kazam Radio started. I know you all know this, but Friends of the Rag just were so clever and aggressive in terms of, as you can see, making fun of things that weren't right. But your artwork's always been amazing, but your wit, and I just like, you can't go to a Lynn and Nino show without reading every title because they're hilarious. And your found objects, I don't know what you made out of calipers, which is not a good memory for a lot of us, but you are just so gifted. And Lynn moved to Tacoma, which was their incredible gain. She hasn't really given you a sense of what she's done for that city. Rolling Heads, by the way, yeah. But you've got a great crowd, and you're my idol. And I still have the quilt you made my son when he was born 33 years ago. Thank you.
Nobody has anything else to ask her for her secrets? Oh, here we go.
Stephen here, ex-treasurer of Friends of the Rag. We go way back. But there isn't anybody else here in the whole auditorium that can talk 7 people into getting into an elevator with a man wearing a tie and nothing else on except his shoes. And I wish you should have had that photograph up here. But it hangs proudly in our house, and with many other memories of Friends of the Rag and beyond. Thank you very much.
Let me tell the rest of that story. So we did manage to persuade Stephen to take off all of his clothes, and we found an apartment building down by the market where we could get a photographer to stand out in front of the elevator. You know, everything had to be just right. And we were advertising, me and a friend were going to make these outrageous ties and do a book or something. So Stephen had on this tie that was about 3 feet long. And then we had to get a couple of other friends in that elevator with us. So we're all standing in the back of the elevator. Stephen's in front. And the guy behind me puts his chin in right here, which is like a funny bone. And when he did that, all women have a reaction like this, like, whoever it is, get out of here. And he backed up, and my elbow went all the way into the emergency button. And Stephen was running around like that. That's it. Thank you for coming.
Yes, and thank you, Lynn.
Hold on, Lynn,
Oh, maybe we have one more over here.
question here. I'm sure if people weren't so shy, there's 1,000 questions, but one thing, most artists pick 1 or 2 mediums, 1 or 2 ways to work, whether it's glass, clay, wood, fiber, and you pick it. And yet you seem to just love to jump into every kind of medium that you can possibly do to try to make something with. Are you able to verbalize why it is that you like to do that? Because it's so much work.
I'm an air sign.
You're an air sign.
I think it's mostly because the idea is what gets me going. So I've got the idea, and then I have to figure out what medium expresses that idea the best. And I've used all kinds of things, coffee and wood and, well, obviously food products and clay and you name it. So I think it's because the idea gets me going, and then I go, how am I going to solve this? And I also do really like figuring out the engineering of it. How am I going to get this thing to be really stable? That's what motivates me.
Thank you. Oh, we have another one over here.
Lynn, can you tell everyone about rolling heads?
Figurehead Roll was the name of a performance art piece I organized in Tacoma. And first of all, just a preliminary idea about that. When I moved to Tacoma, I was used to being in Seattle, where it seemed like you knew everybody and, you know, sort of a team approach in a way. So I moved to Tacoma and I look around, where are the artists? I know there are some here. So I organized, maybe for 3 or 4 years in a row, I wrote grants, and I got money to do some community building art projects. So then, you know how that is, you go, well, now I'm ready to move up to the next level. So I got about 40 people to help me with different skills. Somebody knew how to sew, somebody else was a musician, somebody else was a good writer, somebody else could promote things well. And I managed to get 2 real opera singers to agree to sing La Traviata. And we built a stage on New Year's Eve in downtown Tacoma. And in those days, they had an annual alcohol-free event. I think COVID has wrecked that now. But at the time, we put our opera singers on the stage. And then months before that, we cast the faces of 40 local, mostly politicians. And these were people where you could say everybody would love to see their head roll. And we had to tell the people, you know, you're really unpopular here and you know it. And we want to reproduce your head and then roll it down the hill. And they'd be like, okay.
Well, only one person didn't, right?
Only one person didn't. I won't say who it is. Nobody in this room. The mayor at the time, but anyway.
It was good advertising.
Yes. So so we had those heads turned into the round, and we put gravel in them. So it was the front of a head glued to the back of the head with gravel in them. And we reproduced them, so there were 1,000 of these white plastic heads. And we put them in big bags at the top of the street. And the idea was that we would roll them down the hill in sets, you know, 100 at a time like that, and there'd be rolling heads this whole time. Another factor was we went many times to the recycling department in Tacoma, and we said, can you let us have shredded paper? Because we want to use shredded paper as props on the street. This was on a hill, by the way, downtown. And the shredded paper would sort of represent government documents, was our idea. And eventually they were like, well, okay, we're going to let you have 10 bags. And we put them on the sides of the street, lined them up, and partly that was to keep the audience off the street so these heads could roll. It was raining slightly. The opera singers are up there singing. There are 3,000 people on the street. Like, this was much bigger than I ever thought. And the heads, we had people in costumes pushing them with brooms down the street. They would not roll. They just sat there. We were like, get those heads down. I was sitting at the bottom of the street, and the audience started getting too excited and impatient, and they jumped over the barriers and grabbed the heads, and you could see they brought big plastic bags, and they were stuffing the heads in to take home for souvenirs. And I was mortified. Plus, they were throwing them straight up in the air, having the best time. And from the bottom of the hill where I was, it looked like a popcorn machine. 1,000 heads, like, bouncing up in the thing. And then they started tearing the shredded paper apart. And we were asked to return those big plastic bags of shredded paper. So I jumped up and started going, no, no, and I was trying to stuff it back in. Plus, it's raining. So it was like oatmeal all over the street. And some authority there came up to me and he put his hands on my shoulders and he said, "You are no longer responsible." So the whole thing went completely sideways. It was nothing like we planned, and it didn't matter one bit. Everybody loved it. And everywhere you went all over town, you know, they had these heads propped in the window, and that's it, rolling heads. Figurehead roll.
A most enjoyable afternoon. Thank you so much. Yay.